It's good to see you.
Morning.
It's a beautiful day.
Oh, isn't this great? Just marvelous.
And we finally made it to the Frankfort
We
Cemetery.
finally made it to the thing. We've been talking about this cemetery off and on.
I have been up here just a couple of times to peep over and look at the view of Frankfort, and it's just wonderful.
It's
I can't wait to
gorgeous.
get up here.
Gorgeous on the bend up here, on the first bend, you know, going up into the cemetery. You know, when I take visitors up here and they see the gorgeous view, you know, one fellow asked me the other day, when is the most beautiful view? I said, it's the third week in October, when all of the leaves turn, you know, on the hills. It's gorgeous. But let me just tell you a little bit about the Frankfort Cemetery. It actually was established and approved on February the 27th, 1845 by an act of the legislature. And it is, Barbara, the second oldest incorporated cemetery in the United States.
And what is that distinction?
Well, the distinction is that it was incorporated. You know, it's owned by the shareholders here that own lots and graves in the Frankfort Cemetery. Now, the oldest one is Mount Auburn, of course, up near Boston, and it is a fine place too. But you know, a lot of people say this is the Westminster Abbey of the South, really, because we have so many prominent people that are buried here. For instance, we have a Vice President of the United States. We have 16 governors of Kentucky that are buried here. We have senators. We have Paul Sawyer. We have Joel T. Hart, the great sculptor. We have John Cannon, who was the steamboat captain who actually defeated the Natchez. He was the captain of the Robert E. Lee in the great steamboat race. But we just have so many people here, and one thing that really disturbs me just a little bit, there's so many people that are prominent people that are buried here. I just know that we will probably overlook someone of very, you know, importance.
Well, we'll do our best, and we're going to dedicate 2 shows to this, correct?
We're going to dedicate 2 shows because there's so much to cover here that I figured it was no way we could cover it in one show. So,
this is a beautiful area of the cemetery, but there seems to be a lot of older graves, a lot of governors. Is this owned by the state?
This section is owned by the state. I believe it was about 1851, while the legislature authorized the governor to purchase this section to bury some of their illustrious dead. For instance, Barb, 6 of the first 7 governors of Kentucky were Revolutionary soldiers. And of the 6, 4 are buried right here in this lot.
That's an honor.
Isn't that quite an honor? And you have, in order to be buried here in this lot, it takes an act of the legislature to be buried here. So again, it would be quite an honor. One of the first ones I want to show you, Barb, is Christopher Greenup. He was the 3rd governor of Kentucky, and he came from Virginia. And he served in the Revolutionary War, of course. And he was also, in the early days, he was a member of the legislature. He was a very popular man in that in 1804, he was elected governor of Kentucky without any opposition whatsoever, which is
rare.
That's really rare in Kentucky. Yes, indeed it is. So he had many interests, however. He was a great politician, but he had many interests in that he was a member of the Kentucky River Commission, which had to do with improving the Kentucky River. In 1807, when the Kentucky Bank was established, he was one of the first directors. And he was one of the first trustees of Transylvania. So you can see this gentleman here, this governor, was quite a remarkable man. But we have others, so let's move on over here, Barb, now to General Charles Scott. I want to tell you a little bit about General Scott, okay?
Okay, let's go. Now we've made it over to another governor's grave. Which order did he serve in?
This is General Scott's grave, General Charles Scott. He was the 4th governor of Kentucky. He followed Greenup. Barb, and he was born in 1739 up in Virginia. He was a great Revolutionary War soldier. As a matter of fact, he was a major general in the Revolutionary War. He served with Washington at Valley Forge in the winter of 1777-78. So he was quite a distinguished man. And in 1789, he was elected to represent Woodford County in the Virginia Assembly in 1789. See, that's before we became a state, so he was well respected there. Actually, he was such a fine man, Barbara, that the legislature decided to name Scott County for General Scott. What they did, they took part of Woodford County from Woodford County, and they established Scott County and named it for General Scott. But not only that, there's a town up in Virginia, Scottsville, Virginia, which at one time was the county court of Virginia, that county of Powhatan County. And Scottsville, Virginia was named for General Scott. Of course, again, about 1808, I believe it was, he was elected governor, and he was a very distinguished man. So let's go now from this one over to General Madison.
This is a beautiful, tall
Isn't
marker.
It tall? It's so nice. You know, Barb, this is a fine monument to Governor George Madison. He was a very distinguished man. He served in the Revolutionary War again, you know. The sad part about it is that he died in office after serving only about 1 month. Isn't that sad? But he was a very able man. Some people say he was probably one of the best qualified men to ever run for governor. As a matter of fact, Governor Shelby thought so much of him that in 1796, that's going way back, he appointed him as auditor of public accounts in Kentucky. And at that time, the auditor was about number 3 respected man in state government, and he served as auditor for 20 years. And in 1816, at the conclusion of Governor Shelby's second term, even though he was not in good health, he was urged to run for governor, and he was a very popular candidate. He won, of course. He was inaugurated as governor in September, but unfortunately he passed away the very next month in October, and it was a sad occasion for everybody that knew him, but because he was such a personable and such a popular man here in Frankfort. But that's one of those things, you know, Barbara, you can't be here forever, but he was only 53 years old, and that's a sad part. He died quite young. But from here, let's go over and we'll talk about Governor Adair, who also lived here in Frankfort, okay?
Okay, let's move this way.
Barbara, another famous governor here. He was born in 1857 in South Carolina, as a matter of fact. He was a Revolutionary War soldier again. He fought almost in his own backyard, where his part of the country was just torn up something terrible. But he finally came on to Kentucky. I think he stopped for a while in Lexington, and then he came on to Frankfort. But also he stayed a while over in Mercer County, and he was elected to the legislature to represent Mercer County, and he served for 9 terms, as a matter of fact, so you can see how well respected he was. Actually, you know, Franklin County and Mercer County, Franklin County was actually part of Mercer County. You know, South Frankfort was at one time, so that's where we get that Mercer County, Franklin County, and where I lived here, but just right across the river was Mercer County, see. But he was a well-respected man. Like I say, he was elected to the legislature, and then he was elected governor of Kentucky, and he served admirably because he came to the governorship at a time when there was great turmoil and confusion, and the factions were unhappy and fighting each other because of the Governor Slaughter affair. You see, Governor Slaughter was a lieutenant governor, and when the governor died in office, he became governor. And at that time, there wasn't any set rule as to who was going to be governor, or whether they were going to be appointed, whether they were going to have another election, and so forth. And of course, Slaughter and all of his group, they fought any kind of election. They said that, look, I'm the lieutenant governor, and the governor has died, and I'm going to succeed him, which he did do. But the opposition was, of course, very upset because they thought they should have had an election right away. Of course, later, while they passed the laws to, take care of that kind of a situation. But Adair came along, and he was a very peaceful man and highly respected because of his service to his country in the Revolutionary War, and he was able to sort of smooth the waters, so to speak, Barbara. So let's go on now to the next station, okay? Barb, this is an unusual story here. This is a grave of Governor James T. Morehead, and he was the first native son of Kentucky to hold the governorship. Isn't
now,
that
which governor, which order did he serve in?
He was about the 12th governor of
Kentucky.
Kentucky.
That's unusual for it to be that long to be a native son of Kentucky.
That's right, because so many of them came from Virginia, and like I said, Adair came from South Carolina. But this is the first native son, and this is a sort of an interesting little tidbit, I think, in that when John Breathitt, who was governor before him, when John Breathitt died in office in 1834, this gentleman was the lieutenant governor. Breathitt happened to be, this is John Breathitt now, he happened to be a Democrat, and this gentleman happened to be a Republican. See, so in the election of 1832, why, the governor was elected, and he was a Democrat, but the lieutenant governor that was elected was a Republican. And this is the thing that happened. In 1834, John Breathitt passed away, and the lieutenant governor, being a Republican, he succeeded John Breathitt. So some of the Democrats weren't too happy with that kind of a situation, but it's happened before, so that's, I guess, not a real big deal this day and time, but it was back there in the early days. But another very interesting little tidbit is the fact that James T. Morehead's grandfather was the grandfather of both James T. Morehead and Charles Morehead that was spoke about, down there on the corner of Main and Washington Street, and he was governor, Not only that, but his grandfather was the great-grandfather of Simon Bolivar Buckner, who became governor in 1887. So, yeah, I guess they're trying to keep it in the family, maybe.
That's wonderful. Can you imagine how proud he would have been?
Oh, the great-grandfather, I imagine, the great-grandfather of Buckner, and there's his grandsons, two of them being governor. I imagine he had a marvelous feeling, don't you, Barb?
Wonderful.
Well, let's go now to the next spot, okay?
Tell me about this marker.
Well, this is quite a fine gentleman here. He was born in 1784 up in Virginia, and he came to Kentucky, and he settled in Jessamine County. He graduated from Transylvania University. He studied law and was quite a good lawyer in his day. Then in, I believe it was about 1810, he was elected to Congress without opposition. And then in 1814, he was a member of the legislature. He was elected to the legislature, and he was elected Speaker of the House. And at that time, there happened to come along a vacancy in the United States Senate. So at that time, he was then appointed to fill out an unexpired term in the United States Senate. Then in 1820, Barb, he was elected lieutenant governor of Kentucky. So he was quite a famous gentleman and highly respected, of course, at that time. It's too bad he didn't make a run for governor in 1828, but he was defeated by none other than, I believe it was Thomas Metcalfe. You remember the fellow that was a stonemason that helped
Built the lieutenant governor's mansion in the
That's
middle
right,
there.
Barb. You've got a good memory. So he was quite a distinguished gentleman, nevertheless, and served as lieutenant governor. And there he was a congressman. He served in the Senate. So he was a highly respected man, so the legislature felt like that he should be buried here in this lot. Barbara, this is the grave of General John Coel. He was born in Virginia, but he came here in 1781. And he was quite a fighter with the Indians and also in the early wars. Actually, he rose from a common soldier to a general, and he served actually under the great George Clark. And he later became a legislator. He then was elected lieutenant governor, and he served under, as lieutenant governor, he served under our good friend over there, Christopher Greenup. So he had quite a distinguished career, but he probably is a little bit better known for his fighting for his country in the early wars. Let's now go to the next gentleman. What do you say?
Okay, let's go.
Barbara, this is the grave of Simeon S. Willis. He was born December 1879. Actually, he was born in Lawrence County, Ohio. Now, you asked me a while ago, you know, you wondered how many were born out of state, and this is one of them, of course. But in 1879, he was born, of course, as I said, in Ohio, but he moved to Kentucky in 1889, he was 10 years old at the time, and he became the principal of Springfield, Kentucky School before he was 20 years old.
That's awfully young.
Yes, it was. He was a reporter and editorial writer, and in 1901 he was admitted to the bar. He was a judge of the Court of Appeals from 1927 to 1933, and in 1943, Barbara, he was elected governor over the Democrat J. Leiter Donaldson. And actually, Barbara, he was the only Republican elected governor between 1927 and 1967.
And we're just beyond the grave we just talked about.
Right. This is the grave of Bland Ballard, and he was born up near Fredericksburg, Virginia in 1761, but his family moved down to Shelby County in 1779, I believe it was. And he was quite a soldier. He fought in the War of 1812. He was wounded at the Battle of the River Raisin, and he represented Shelby County many times in the state legislature. He had a distinguished career, and he finally passed away in Shelbyville in 1853. Quite a distinguished man. If he wasn't distinguished, he wouldn't be buried in this state lot, Barb. So let's go now. There's so many to talk about. You know, you hate to stop, but I know our time's sort of running out, so we'll go to the next one, okay?
This is a beautiful stone here.
Isn't this a beautiful stone, though, Barbara? This is the grave of one of the finest sculptures that Kentucky or the United States ever did know. This is the grave of Joel T. Hart. He was born in Clark County, Kentucky. His parents were very poor, so he only had actually about 3 months of education. That's all, Barbara. But by his own efforts, he was able to work on his talents to become one of the greatest sculptors in America. As a matter of fact, he made sculptures of John J. Crittenden, Cassius Clay, Andrew Jackson, and one or two others. A couple of them are actually Jackson and Henry Clay was the other Clay. Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson, their busts are in the Kentucky Historical Society. He was a great sculptor, and one of his most famous works was the Triumph of Chastity. It took him over 20 years working on that one piece. And somebody said, well, why has it taken you so long to work on this one piece, 20 years? And he said, well, the Almighty saw fit to be unable, probably, to make a perfect woman until about 18 years. So he said, why do you think that I can make a perfect model in less time?
That makes sense.
He studied overseas some in Florence, Italy, where the great Michelangelo studied some, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually died in Florence, Italy in 1877. At first, the word got back, they weren't real sure how he died, where he was, or anything. But the legislature made attempts to find out where his body was located. And 10 years later, in 1887, I believe it was, they brought him back by an act of the legislature again. They thought he was such an outstanding man. They brought him back, and they buried him here in 1889. Great person, marvelous sculptor, one of the greatest in the United States. He was a great man.
Wonderful. Quite an honor to be brought back and
It
buried
is,
here.
all the way back from Florence, Italy, to Frankfort, Kentucky, to stay here and be buried here in the state lot. Quite an honor, I would say, wouldn't you?
I would.
Barb, this is the grave of J.C.W. Beckham. He was the 35th governor of Kentucky, and he was born in 1869. You know, I think I told you maybe when we were down there in front of the old Capitol building, he succeeded to the governorship upon the death of Governor William Goebel in 1900. In 1900, in November, he was elected by the people to fill out the remainder of the unexpired term and was re-elected 3 years later to succeed himself for a full term, making his tenure in office last nearly 8 successive years, which is a pretty long period there. Consecutively, Barbara.
Especially in Kentucky's history.
Yes, that's right. His mother was the daughter of former Governor Charles A. and Margaret Cripps Wycliffe. There again, you see the people that are related to somebody else that had been governor or senator. In 1888, Beckham was appointed principal of the Bardstown Public Schools, and he served there until 1893. He had been studying law, and in 1889 he was admitted to the bar. In 1893 he was the Democratic nominee for the legislature, and he was elected without opposition. He was a member of the Kentucky House of Representatives 1894 to 98, and he served as Speaker in 1898, just before he ran for lieutenant governor. At the age of 30, barely old enough to qualified to serve as governor, Beckham was sworn into office upon the death of Governor Goebel on February the 3rd, 1900. Though Governor William S. Taylor, the Republican, he refused to vacate the office for a while. To determine who should fill the unexpired term, Barb, of Governor Goebel, a special election was held in November of 1900, in which Beckham defeated John W. Yerkes by a vote of 233,000 to 229,000, pretty close. Beckham ran again for governor 20 years later, but was defeated by the Republican Flem D. Sampson. He was a fine man and well respected, and just think, somebody only 30 years old taking over the governorship down there in Frankfort in turbulent times right after the assassination of Governor William Goebel. Now let's move along to another one, Barb.
Okay, let's go on. I am intrigued by the inscription on this gravestone. Tell me the history behind it.
Well, he was quite a distinguished judge of the Court of Appeals, Barbara. Actually, he was born on May the 16th, 1820. But he had a sad ending, even though he was quite a distinguished circuit judge. Because on Monday morning, March the 26th, 1879, he was shot and killed. He was assassinated as he was approaching the ladies' entrance of the old Capitol Hotel. He was walking along with one of his other partners, a judge by the name of T.H. Hines, and as they approached the ladies' entrance of the old Capitol Hotel, here comes a fellow by the name of Thomas Buford. And he stopped Judge Elliott and he said, Judge, how would you like to go snipe hunting with me today? And the judge says, no, I don't believe I want to do that today. And then Buford said, well, would you like to take a drink? And without any further ado, why, this fellow had a double-barreled shotgun that was loaded with buckshot, and he shot Elliott dead right on the spot. And the reason that he assassinated Judge Elliott was the fact that Judge Elliott, in doing his duty, had rendered a decision which amounted to about $20,000 against Thomas Buford. So it was a sad ending to a very distinguished circuit judge right here in Frankfort, Kentucky. The fellow, actually, Buford, was finally taken out of town to be tried because there was a mob assembling and they were afraid maybe that they might have a hanging, if they could get to Thomas Buford. So he was taken out of town at another place and he was tried, and finally he was declared insane and was acquitted. I think it's too bad that they didn't take him out, take care of him in another way, but maybe I better not get into that, Barbara.
I think that's a question that's still being debated.
That's right.
We probably won't resolve it here.
Well, listen, I tell you, this has certainly been nice working with you on this period of the cemetery. I look forward to working with you, though, on the second period of the cemetery, okay?
When we'll visit Daniel Boone's grave.
That's right. Okay.